The diner on Green Springs Highway was alive with its usual evening crowd, the low hum of conversation and clatter of dishes blending into a warm, familiar rhythm. At the corner booth, Anna and Lisa Miller shared a milkshake, laughter spilling between them like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Anna, steady and protective, nudged Lisa playfully, her eyes sharp and alert, always watching for trouble. Lisa, soft and trusting, laughed freely, unburdened by fear, her dreams of escaping Birmingham dancing behind her bright eyes. No one noticed the man sitting a few booths away, quiet and still. His presence was a shadow barely acknowledged, but his gaze followed their every movement, every tilt of the head, every whispered joke. He memorized their routine, catalogued their smiles, and measured the distance they would travel on their short walk home. Every laugh they shared tightened the invisible coil around them, a coil that would soon snap. When their cousin Darian offered a ride home, Anna shook her head. "We'll be fine," she said, her voice calm and confident, unaware of the danger threading its way closer with each step. Those words, so ordinary, would echo in her mother's mind for years, a haunting reminder of trust and love that had met cruelty far too early. Have you ever felt safe, only to realize danger was closer than you imagined? Comment if this scares you. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. But as the sisters left the diner, their laughter still ringing, no one knew that night would mark the last time they walked together freely. The last time Birmingham would see two lives untouched by fear, unaware that horror had already chosen them as its next victims. The night air hung heavy over the quiet streets of Birmingham as Anna and Lisa walked the familiar route home. The city seemed calm, almost ordinary. But that calm carried a weight, a tension unnoticed by the sisters, invisible, yet suffocating. Their laughter still floated into the night, light and carefree, unaware of the eyes tracking them from just beyond the streetlights. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, footsteps echoed too far behind, then vanished. A figure lingered near a corner, indistinct in the dim glow, yet unnervingly present. It was the sort of presence that gnawed at a person's instinct, though the sisters felt nothing but comfort in their routine. Anna's hand instinctively brushed her sister's shoulder, a subtle protective gesture. And yet, it would not be enough. The city slept, unaware that something malicious was threading its way through the streets. Each step the sisters took carried them further into a trap no one could see. They joked about trivial things, a passing car, a cat scurrying across the sidewalk, but every smile, every moment of levity, was being catalogued, measured, anticipated by someone who had been waiting, watching, and learning. Pain and frustration settle over you as you realize how fragile safety can be. Two young women, cautious yet trusting, moving through the night in a city they thought they knew, never imagining the threat growing closer. Fueled by patience and malice, their innocence made them invisible to the danger at their heels, yet their very confidence would mark them, a beacon for the cruelty about to strike. The streets that should have been a place of home and comfort became a stage, and the audience was only one, a silent predator, waiting. Anger rises at the thought how ordinary moments, so filled with life, can be shattered in a heartbeat, leaving fear to occupy every corner of a city. And in those shadows, the first moments of horror began to take root. By the time Anna and Lisa should have reached home, the streets were silent, empty. The familiar blocks that once felt safe now seemed endless and threatening. The sisters' laughter had faded, replaced by the soft shuffle of their footsteps, unaware that the world around them had changed in an instant. Marissa Miller waited, anxious but hopeful. Minutes stretched into hours. Calls to friends yielded no answers. Each passing moment gnawed at her, a mother's dread growing sharper with every tick of the clock. What started as worry became a creeping panic, a gnawing fear no mother should ever feel. The sisters were gone. Not a scream, not a struggle, not even a sound to indicate their fate. They had vanished, as if the city itself had swallowed them whole. The quiet streets became a stage for terror, every shadow a threat, every empty alley a question without an answer. Anger erupted at the injustice. Two young women, careful, protective, and trusting, taken from the world in a moment no one saw coming. How could something so cruel strike so close to home? How could laughter be silenced in a heartbeat? These questions would haunt the family, the community, and everyone who heard their story. And yet, no one saw. No one intervened. The city continued in oblivion, unaware that horror had already walked among them. The absence of evidence, the lack of witnesses, turned the sisters' disappearance into a nightmare that would linger for decades, a wound that refused to heal. Fear gripped Birmingham that night. Parents pulled children inside. Neighbors glanced over their shoulders. The whispers began about two young women who disappeared, about a city that had failed to protect them. Every heartbeat of every resident carried the weight of what had happened. In that moment, the unthinkable had become reality. Two lives had been stolen, leaving a void no explanation could fill. And for those who would follow the story, the lesson was chilling. Safety can vanish in an instant, and darkness often walks beside you, unseen. By dawn, worry had transformed into raw panic. Teresa Miller's heart pounded as she realized her daughters hadn't returned. She called friends, relatives, anyone who might have seen them. But silence met every question. Each unanswered call twisted her fear tighter, and the calm of the morning air felt suffocating. Anna and Lisa had vanished into thin air, leaving only a growing void in the life of a mother who refused to believe they could ever disappear willingly. Neighbors began to notice her frantic pacing, her tears streaking a face that had aged decades and hours. The street that had once held comfort now carried the weight of dread. Every sound, a car door, a dog barking, a child's laugh pierced her heart, each one a reminder that her daughters were out there somewhere, and she could do nothing to reach them. Police were called, and their presence did little to soothe the mounting terror. Initial investigations, routine questions, and idle theories about runaways or casual disappearances collided with Teresa's certainty. Her girls weren't gone by choice. Every whispered suggestion of partying, jealousy, or carelessness was met with her fierce refusal to accept them. Anna was responsible. Lisa was cautious. Neither would vanish without reason. Anger, sharp and unrelenting, began to take root not just at the unknown hand that stole them, but at a world that seemed unable to grasp the gravity of their absence. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between disbelief and fear. And now, the viewers must pause and reflect. Safety is a fragile illusion. One moment it's there, the next it's gone. If you don't subscribe right now, you could miss warnings like this that might one day save you or someone you love. Are you willing to take that risk? By noon, the panic had spread like wildfire. Families glanced over shoulders. Friends clutched loved ones. The shadows of fear had begun to settle over Birmingham, marking a city that would never be the same and two sisters whose absence would be etched into every corner of its streets. By the early morning hours, the streets of Birmingham remained empty, but inside one modest home on the west side, silence was suffocating. Teresa Miller's heart pounded as the hours passed with no sign of her daughters. The clocks ticked with cruel persistence, each second a reminder that Anna and Lisa had not returned. Her initial worry hardened into something sharper, something that gnawed at her chest. Panic. She retraced their familiar routes in her mind, every street corner and shortcut they might have taken. Each possibility ended the same way. The girls were nowhere to be found. Calls to friends and neighbors brought nothing but frustration and confusion. Every unanswered ring twisted fear tighter, leaving an unbearable ache where hope had once lived. The city, still asleep, held no answers. Its quietness mocked her desperation. Every shadow in the corners of her home and every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, carrying with them the fear of something gone forever. Anxiety was no longer an abstract feeling, it had physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, tightening her chest, making every breath a struggle. Neighbors began to stir, drawn into the unease, without knowing why. Glances exchanged over fences and through blinds reflected the silent tension growing across the neighborhood. Rumors began to rise like smoke. 2 young women missing. A mother frantic with worry. Streets that were suddenly unsafe. The ache in Teresa's chest was mirrored by the pulse of the city, an invisible wave of dread spreading outward. No one could see the girls. No one could yet comprehend what had been taken. In that quiet dawn, panic was not just hers, it was a force waiting to ripple through Birmingham. Every parent, every resident would soon feel the same tight grip of fear, the sense that something ordinary had been stolen from their lives. And in that fear, the first whispers of horror began to take root, reaching into every home and every heart. By mid-morning, the reality of Anna and Lisa's absence began to press down on the city. Police officers arrived, their presence a thin layer of reassurance against the mounting fear, but their questions only amplified the weight of uncertainty. Every inquiry into friends, acquaintances, and routines yielded fragments that led nowhere. The sisters had vanished without a trace, and each dead end added to the growing frustration. Initial theories circulated quickly. Some whispered that the girls had run off, perhaps caught up in the thrill of youthful rebellion, or a fleeting romantic encounter. Others speculated about casual misfortune lost in the night, delayed by a misunderstanding. Yet every suggestion seemed to miss the truth entirely, grinding hope down to its barest remnants. Officers moved from house to house, collecting statements, checking alibis, following leads that evaporated before answers could form. Witnesses' accounts conflicted, memories faltered, and the city's fabric of certainty began to fray. The more they searched, the clearer it became that the sisters' disappearance was not simple, not explainable by carelessness or coincidence. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers in coffee shops and hurried conversations at bus stops. Gossip filled the spaces between the facts, twisting the fear into something tangible, something that tightened the grip on everyone's chest. Mothers drew their children closer. Men watched the streets with narrowed eyes, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for news that would not come. In the midst of confusion and rising anxiety, one truth became undeniable. Anna and Lisa were missing, and no one yet understood why or how. Every unanswered question magnified the tension. Every conflicting story deepened the dread. If this happened in your neighborhood, wouldn't you want to know what to look for? Subscribe to stay aware. Knowledge might be the difference between safety and tragedy. By late afternoon, the disappearance of Anna and Lisa had rippled far beyond the Miller household. Birmingham, normally a city of familiar streets and quiet routines, had shifted. Windows were watched more closely, doors double-checked, and the ordinary hum of daily life carried an edge of uncertainty. Fear was no longer isolated. It had grown into a shared pulse running through the city. Parents gripped their children tighter, holding them back from playgrounds and bus stops. Women altered their routes home, walking in pairs or avoiding the streets entirely. Even those who had not known the Miller sisters felt the tension, sensing that something unimaginable had occurred in their midst. The ordinary world had fractured, replaced by the unnerving knowledge that danger could strike without warning, without reason. Rumors and speculation filled the air, creating a fog of anxiety. Every unidentified car parked too long, every stranger lingering on a corner, became a source of suspicion. The whispers were relentless. 2 sisters vanished, unanswered questions multiplying like shadows across the cityscape. The fear was no longer personal. It belonged to everyone. Within the police department, frustration mounted alongside concern. Leads were scant, and every attempt to reconstruct the sisters' final steps ended in uncertainty. For the city, the unknown was a living entity, pressing against doors and windows, a reminder that safety was fragile and fleeting. Anger and helplessness intertwined. People were furious at the cruelty that had struck, terrified of the randomness, and desperate for guidance. Every resident carried the same unspoken question. Who could do this, and could it happen to someone I know? In Birmingham that evening, ordinary routines had evaporated. The city had entered a state of heightened alert, a collective heartbeat synchronized with fear. Every shadow, every silence, every passing stranger, reminded the citizens of a single, chilling truth. The world could change in an instant, and vigilance was the only shield against the unknown. As night fell over Birmingham, the city remained on edge. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks and quiet intersections, casting long shadows where none had been before. Every passerby felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down a city collectively aware that 2 young lives had been stolen without explanation, leaving questions that no one could answer. Teresa Miller refused to rest. She scoured neighborhoods, revisited every place her daughters might have been, and contacted anyone who could provide even the faintest clue. Her energy was relentless, her worry unyielding, and yet with each dead end, her desperation grew. The silence of the city mirrored the silence of her daughter's absence, amplifying the ache that had taken root in her heart. Across Birmingham, families felt the invisible hand of fear tighten around them. Routine activities became exercises in caution. Parents drove slower, watched more closely, and considered for the first time the fragility of safety. The collective anxiety was a stark reminder that tragedy could arrive unannounced, and no one was immune. Authorities worked tirelessly, but the trail led only to uncertainty. Every tip, every reported sighting, failed to resolve the mystery. The city learned an unsettling truth. Vigilance alone was not enough to prevent the unthinkable. And here, the lesson extends to you, the viewer. Knowledge and awareness are shields, and the cost of inaction can be immeasurable. If this happened in your neighborhood, wouldn't you want to know what to look for? Subscribe to stay aware. Staying informed could be the difference between safety and tragedy for you or someone you love. Birmingham slept uneasily that night, the quiet punctuated by the echo of absence. 2 sisters were gone, and the city was forever altered by their disappearance. The tension lingered, a shadow over every home, every street, every heartbeat, as fear settled into the fabric of daily life. It was an ordinary morning for a sanitation worker, one of those days measured by routine and repetition. But as he pushed his cart along an overgrown lot on the outskirts of Jefferson County, something unusual caught his eye. A glint of leather partially hidden in the weeds. He paused, curiosity flickering. Kneeling down, he discovered a small, worn purse. The kind of purse a young woman might carry. Inside, he found identification. Anna and Lisa Miller. Both IDs lay intact, yet the rest of the contents were untouched. No notes, no money missing, no sign of a struggle, only the quiet, heavy presence of absence. Something about it screamed that this was not a forgotten item left carelessly behind. It was a marker, a signpost pointing to something far darker than anyone could yet comprehend. Authorities were notified, and search teams arrived quickly, bringing with them trained dogs. The dogs picked up a scent, a fragile trail that hinted at movement, of footsteps that had vanished into the night. But the trail dissolved, leaving nothing but a faint whisper in the air. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the path, erasing every trace of the sisters' final journey. Neighbors and community members began to feel the weight of the discovery. What should have been a small, recoverable item had become a symbol of terror and uncertainty. The quiet streets, once comforting in their familiarity, now seemed like corridors leading to unseen threats. The ordinary morning had shifted, replaced by a collective awareness that something incomprehensible had occurred, something that would demand answers no one yet had. In that silence, one truth emerged. The girls were gone, and the world had left no breadcrumbs for those who sought them. Each step toward the unknown carried a heavier sense of dread, and every eye that scanned the lot sensed the impossible, unspoken question. How could someone disappear so completely, leaving only a purse behind? A few days later, the quiet of Oak Mountain was broken not by sirens or voices, but by the careful, deliberate footsteps of a hunter making his way through dense underbrush. He was used to the solitude of the woods, the smell of pine needles, the rustle of leaves underfoot. That morning, however, something felt different. The air carried a stillness that pressed against the chest, an unnatural pause that made every sound sharper. every shadow deeper. As he navigated a narrow path, his boot struck something soft yet unyielding. Curious, he crouched down and pushed aside the undergrowth. What he found made him freeze. The earth had been disturbed in shallow depressions, barely hidden beneath years of leaf litter. Unease crawled up his spine. The shapes were unmistakable graves. Two shallow graves, side by side, almost too carefully hidden, yet too raw in their presence to go unnoticed. Panic and disbelief collided in the hunter's mind. The silence around him seemed to swell, the forest holding its breath. No birds sang. No wind stirred. Only the oppressive weight of what lay beneath the soil and the realization that life had been taken here, secretly, with a precision that sent chills through every nerve. He stumbled back, heart hammering, knowing this was no ordinary tragedy. The discovery demanded immediate action. Authorities were called, and the area was quickly secured. Word spread through Birmingham like wildfire, and the city felt the weight of grief as though the earth itself had spoken. For the first time, the disappearance of Anna and Lisa Miller moved from uncertainty to concrete horror. Two sisters were gone, buried in the earth they had once walked freely. The hunter had unearthed not just their graves, but a question that would haunt every corner of Birmingham. Who could commit such a crime and vanish without a trace? When authorities reached Oak Mountain, the air was thick with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The two shallow graves sat exposed, a grim testament to the violence that had unfolded in secret. For the first time, Birmingham confronted the reality that Anna and Lisa Miller were gone, and whatever had taken them had done so with a precision that defied comprehension. Investigators combed the area meticulously. Gloves brushed over disturbed soil. Every footprint was catalogued, every twig carefully examined. Yet with every passing hour, the evidence slipped further from their grasp. No fingerprints marked the soil. No DNA lingered beneath the sisters' nails. No weapon was recovered, and the faint tire impressions nearby had been eroded by time and weather, offering only vague shapes where concrete leads should have been. The absence of clues was not a comfort, it was a threat. It signaled a perpetrator who had planned, watched, and executed without error, leaving nothing to betray him. Every empty corner, every silent brush of earth, was a reminder of the invisible force that had acted against two innocent lives. The meticulous erasure of traces only deepened the sense of helplessness among the officers, and the city itself seemed to shiver under the weight of what had been done. Birmingham residents waited, eyes scanning shadows, hearts holding silent prayers. The sisters' disappearance had grown into something uncontainable, a fear that seeped into every home. Parents gripped their children closer. Friends and neighbors whispered warnings to each other in hushed tones, haunted by the thought that a predator had moved unseen through their streets. And yet, the greatest terror lay in the unknown. How could someone commit such an act and leave nothing behind? The killer's presence had vanished almost completely, leaving only questions, dread, and the gnawing certainty that Anna and Lisa's final moments were secrets, known only to those who had taken them. As investigators pieced together the scene, a chilling realization took hold. The graves revealed nothing beyond the stark truth of two lives ended. Every lead vanished into thin air. Every potential clue dissolved. The killer had left almost nothing, no fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, no trail. It was as if the earth itself conspired to protect the perpetrator. The absence of evidence became the first true test of patience and resolve for the police. Each officer knew the implications. A murderer operating with such control could strike again, and the longer he remained undetected, the bolder he might grow. Community fear, already simmering, intensified. Parents double-checked locks, friends whispered warnings, and neighbors scanned the streets with eyes wide open, unsure who could be trusted. The city's collective anxiety became almost tangible. Silence settled over the streets in a way that felt deliberate, oppressive, as if the crime itself had extended its reach beyond the woods and into the hearts of everyone in Birmingham. Every corner, every alley, every shadow, now held potential danger. The knowledge that the murderer had vanished without a trace left a lingering sense of vulnerability, a reminder that the unthinkable had already happened, and there was no guarantee it wouldn't happen again. Even the police, trained and experienced, faced an uncomfortable truth. The killer had acted with planning, patience, and control beyond their ability to immediately counter. The sisters' disappearance was not a random act. It was precise, calculated, and terrifying in its invisibility. And so, a chilling question settled over Birmingham like a storm cloud refusing to pass. How could someone commit such horrors and leave the world with nothing but questions? With the killer's vanishing act complete, the city and investigators were left staring into the unknown, waiting for a break that might finally illuminate the truth hidden in plain sight. Detective Roland Keene stepped into the Miller case with the weight of Birmingham pressing down on him. Known for his sharp instincts and unyielding resolve, he had seen countless crimes, but something about these sisters' disappearance felt different. It was precise, controlled, and personal. Every detail of the scene, from the abandoned purse to the shallow graves in Oak Mountain, spoke of someone who had planned carefully and moved with intent. Keene understood the delicate balance between urgency and patience. He knew that in cases like this, rushing could destroy evidence that wasn't even visible yet. The pressure was immense. Parents were desperate, neighbors were frightened, and whispers of who might be responsible grew louder each day. The city's anxiety was palpable, and everyone was watching, waiting, and fearing what might come next. His first move was methodical. Keene assembled a small task force, assigning officers to canvass neighborhoods, check surveillance where possible, and interview anyone who might have crossed paths with the sisters that night. He demanded precision, careful attention, and, above all, patience. Every report, every witness statement, every minor detail was logged, cross-checked, and scrutinized. Even with experience on his side, Keene felt the frustration that comes with uncertainty. He knew the pressure wasn't just on him, it seeped into the city. Parents held their children closer, friends whispered warnings, and strangers eyed one another with suspicion. In a place that once felt safe, fear had begun to take root, spreading quietly like smoke through the streets of Birmingham. Keene's determination became a beacon for the team, but it was also a stark reminder of what was at stake. 2 young lives had been stolen, and the person responsible had left almost nothing behind. Every step he took was measured, yet the shadow of uncertainty loomed. The city's hope and terror now rested on his ability to see what others could not. The first person to draw serious attention was Trevor Haynes, Anna Miller's former partner. On paper, the circumstances looked suspicious. Arguments, a bitter breakup, and unsettling remarks whispered among acquaintances painted a potential picture of rage and resentment. Officers approached him cautiously, aware that initial impressions could be misleading. Trevor agreed to an interview, his posture defensive but not hostile. Questions came fast, probing for inconsistencies, motives, and anything that could tie him to the disappearance. Hours passed. He spoke of the breakup, of lost trust, of ordinary disagreements that had never escalated into anything dangerous. Yet the weight of suspicion lingered in the room like a shadow, coloring every word, every hesitation, every glance. For investigators, Trevor's alibi was crucial. Phone records placed him across town during the night. Anna and Lisa vanished. Every call, every timestamp, every detail was cross-checked. Despite the initial suspicion, the alibi held. There was no connection, no evidence to justify further charges. The relief was thin, a fragile veil over the growing frustration of the task force. The community watched closely. Rumors swirled faster than facts. Conversations in kitchens, offices, and grocery stores were punctuated by fear and speculation. Could it have been someone close to them? Each unanswered question drove tension higher, leaving parents anxious and neighbors mistrustful. No one felt safe. Even as Trevor walked free, the case had taken a heavier toll. The detectives knew that a killer still moved unseen through Birmingham. Every dead end was a reminder that the truth remained hidden, and that fear could fester longer than anyone expected. The task force pressed on, aware that the city's trust in them and in the possibility of justice was fragile and slipping. After Trevor Haynes was cleared, The investigation shifted toward Marcus Langford, Lisa Miller's employer at a downtown clothing store. Rumors had circulated awkward flirtations, rejected advances, late-night messages, but nothing concrete. Still, the police could not ignore any lead. Every whisper had to be pursued, every shadow examined. For the sake of justice and the memory of the sisters, Langford was brought in for questioning. He appeared uneasy, but cooperative. Officers probed the messages, the social interactions, and the possibility of anger that could escalate into violence. Each answer revealed awkward attempts at communication, minor misunderstandings, and nothing that pointed to harm. Still, every pause, every glance, every hesitation was noted. Investigators had learned that in cases like this, the smallest detail could hide the largest truth. As hours stretched into a full day, frustration mounted. Every lead so far had ended in dead ends. Trevor Haynes, then Marcus Langford, both plausible, both ultimately innocent. Detectives and officers felt the invisible weight of failure pressing down on them. The city, meanwhile, was sinking deeper into unease. Conversations turned to suspicion. Neighbors questioned neighbors, friends questioned friends. Who could be trusted when anyone might hold a secret? The lack of evidence was exasperating. Nothing linked Langford to the disappearance. No witness could confirm seeing him near the sisters that night. Every angle was explored and dismissed. The task force realized that the person responsible had orchestrated the crime with such care that even the most obvious suspects could be innocent. Despite the dead ends, the investigation could not stop. The memory of Anna and Lisa demanded persistence. The city's fear and the detectives' frustration built a tension that refused to fade. A reminder that somewhere, the killer was still walking free. And Birmingham had yet to see the first breakthrough. With the first leads proving unfruitful, the weight of the case pressed heavily on everyone involved. Detectives worked tirelessly, chasing every tip, reviewing every statement. Yet the trail remained cold. Frustration in the task force mirrored the growing dread in the city. Birmingham had become a place where parents looked over their shoulders, and strangers were eyed with suspicion. Every unanswered question fed fear. Residents whispered warnings to friends and family, wondering who might be capable of such cruelty. Streets that once felt familiar now seemed unpredictable. The disappearance of Anna and Lisa had cast a shadow over neighborhoods, leaving the simple acts of daily life, walking home, opening a door, leaving for work fraught with tension. Every passerby became a potential threat. Every unfamiliar vehicle, a signal to be wary. At the police department, pressure mounted. Officers were exhausted yet relentless. Each new lead, no matter how minor, was pursued with determination, though the emotional toll was visible on every face. Keene and his team knew that with each passing day, the killer remained free, and the community's fear grew. Silence was no longer a comfort. It was a warning, a reminder of what lurked just out of sight. Amid this tension, a question began to echo quietly through Birmingham. If someone close to you, someone you trusted, were capable of hiding a dark secret, would you notice? The city's unease now intertwined with personal doubt, and no one felt completely safe. Story-driven engagement lingered in the air. Would you know who to trust if everyone seemed suspicious? The question demanded reflection, pulling viewers into the story not just as observers, but as participants in the tension. The truth remained elusive, the danger invisible, and the city was left waiting, watching, fearing, and hoping for the breakthrough that might never come. Reports began trickling in almost immediately. Neighbors described strange men loitering near street corners, vehicles parked in odd places, and shadows that seemed to follow familiar paths. A van with tinted windows, seen idling near the edge of the neighborhood for hours, became a source of whispered concern. Each description added weight to the growing sense of unease that had settled over Birmingham. Parents spoke in hushed tones, recounting glimpses of unfamiliar faces at dusk, figures lingering too long by bus stops, and people who seemed to vanish when approached. Every street, every alley, every side road was examined anew by fearful eyes. What had once been ordinary routines, walking home, stopping by the corner store, Visiting friends now felt dangerous. The city's heartbeat had shifted. Police officers followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. Calls poured in, describing fleeting interactions, shadowy figures glimpsed through windows, and vehicles that did not belong. Investigators logged every detail, hoping that one small observation might point to the person responsible. Yet every sighting seemed to dissipate when examined, leaving officers frustrated and the public anxious. The pattern was clear. Someone had shattered the sense of safety that had once been taken for granted. Even the smallest anomaly, a dark car parked near the park, a man walking too slowly along the sidewalk, triggered alarms in the minds of parents and neighbors. Fear spread silently through the streets, coloring every interaction, every glance, and every decision. Birmingham had become a city on edge. Every shadow, every unfamiliar vehicle, every unexpected noise was scrutinized. The disappearance of Anna and Lisa Miller had left the city in a state of constant vigilance. Suspicion replaced trust, and safety became a memory, fragile and distant. As reports of suspicious figures and vehicles continued, the police decided to act publicly. Witnesses were asked to describe the men and vans they had seen. Sketch artists worked tirelessly, translating fear and fleeting memories into faces and shapes on paper. The images were released to the public, posted in newspapers and broadcast on local news channels, each one a desperate attempt to catch a glimpse of the elusive culprit. For the city, these sketches became both a source of hope and a reminder of fear. Residents scanned their streets and neighborhoods, checking everyone they saw against the images. Some swore they recognized a familiar face. Others saw someone entirely new. Every sighting was reported, every name cross-checked, yet every lead faded into dead ends. The frustration mounted as familiar faces proved innocent, and strangers remained untraceable. Investigators were caught in a relentless cycle. Chase a tip, investigate, confirm it false, and start again. The sketches, intended as tools for clarity, often deepened confusion. They showed possibilities, not certainty. They prompted suspicion, whispered accusations, and public debates. Friends questioned friends, neighbors eyed neighbors, and every interaction carried the weight of doubt. The frustration was not confined to law enforcement. Birmingham's citizens felt powerless, trapped between fear and the need for answers. The city's rhythm had been disrupted, every door locked, every glance over the shoulder, every hurried trip home reminded everyone that the sisters were gone, and that someone responsible remained hidden. Through the dead ends, one truth became undeniable. The person who took Anna and Lisa had planned meticulously, leaving behind only traces that could not be followed. Every sketch released, every tip investigated, failed to pierce the veil. The tension in the city thickened, and the fear that had begun with shadows and vans grew, settling like a constant, suffocating weight on every street corner. As the weeks passed with no clear answers, Birmingham began to feel different, slower, quieter, heavier. Parents kept children indoors long after dark. Playgrounds remained empty, schoolyards silent, and streets that once bustled with life felt unfamiliar. Every evening carried a weight of apprehension, each shadow a question no one wanted to ask aloud. Neighborhoods became insular. Families avoided casual visits, reluctant to expose themselves to potential danger. People glanced nervously at strangers, and even neighbors they had known for years. The disappearance of Anna and Lisa had stretched fear across the city like an invisible barrier. Simple routines, walking the dog, going to the store, taking an evening stroll became acts of courage. Inside homes, conversations revolved around what had happened, who could be responsible, and whether anyone could truly be trusted. Parents spoke in hushed tones about keeping their children safe, adjusting schedules, and avoiding routes once considered ordinary. A sense of hyper-awareness settled over the city. Doors were locked earlier, lights left on longer, and every unusual sound was scrutinized. Even the most ordinary spaces, the diner where the sisters had laughed, the streets they walked each day were now sites of collective anxiety. The city had absorbed their absence, carrying it in every glance and every cautionary warning passed along among families. Fear had become a constant companion, replacing a sense of normalcy that had been taken for granted. The police continued to follow leads, but each dead end reinforced the community's terror. Every report of a shadowy figure, every unidentifiable van, and every fleeting glimpse of an unknown person reminded Birmingham that danger could strike without warning. The city's rhythm was no longer its own. It moved to the pulse of uncertainty, every citizen acutely aware that the person responsible for Anna and Lisa's disappearance was still out there, unseen, watching. By now, the weight of uncertainty had settled over Birmingham like a heavy fog. Every unconfirmed sighting, every sketch that led nowhere, and every report of a shadowy figure reminded the city that the sisters' fate remained a mystery. The fear had seeped into the daily lives of its residents, shaping behavior, dictating choices, and leaving the community tense, alert, and exhausted. Parents still kept children indoors. Friends checked in more often, not always out of concern for casual matters, but out of a quiet, persistent worry. Could the person responsible still be among them? Hidden in plain sight, the unknown had taken form in every glance, every step, and every moment after sunset. Ordinary routines were now laced with anxiety, a reminder that innocence could vanish in a heartbeat. Despite the relentless search, the truth remained elusive. Tips were investigated, witnesses questioned, and sketches circulated. Yet each lead crumbled, leaving frustration in its place. The investigators, bound by procedure and protocol, were faced with the cruel reality of dead ends and unanswered questions. The community, meanwhile, became a city of whispered warnings, cautious movements, and eyes trained for the unseen. And here, in the midst of this tension, one question emerges for you. Imagine living in fear for years. Hit like if this makes you shiver. Every like, every engagement, is a way to acknowledge the stakes, to confront the reality of what happens when danger hides in plain sight. The threat that haunted Birmingham's streets was not abstract. It was real, tangible, and relentless. The stage is now set for despair to deepen, for hope to waver, and for the story of the Miller sisters to reveal just how elusive justice can be. The tension is rising, the fear is palpable, and the city waits with bated breath for the breakthrough that might never come. Months turned into years, and the initial momentum of the investigation began to slow. Officers who had spent sleepless nights chasing every lead were reassigned. The task force gradually reduced to a skeleton crew. Headlines that once screamed urgency became brief reminders in the back pages of newspapers. The city's attention shifted elsewhere, leaving the disappearance of Anna and Lisa Miller in a quiet, uneasy limbo. For the authorities, the trail had gone cold. Every tip that once sparked hope now ended in disappointment. Witness accounts were too vague, leads too fractured, and evidence too scarce. Phone calls from concerned citizens slowed as the sense of futility grew. Investigators had followed every path they could, yet the shadow of uncertainty lingered over Birmingham, a reminder that the person responsible remained free and unaccountable. The city itself seemed to adjust to the new reality. Streets, once alive with casual evening strolls, grew quieter. Families adapted routines, avoiding long walks, keeping doors locked earlier, and watching every movement in their neighborhoods. Fear had become woven into daily life, subtle but persistent, shaping interactions and creating a heightened sense of vigilance that never fully faded. Even with the case officially labeled cold, the memory of the sisters' laughter, the empty chairs at home, and the hollow absence of justice kept the city on edge. Birmingham understood that a cold case did not mean the crime had been forgotten. It meant the person responsible had managed to blend in, walking freely, unseen, and unchallenged. And for the Miller family, this was intolerable. Though official investigations receded, the search for answers continued, fueled by determination, grief, and an unwavering belief that the truth could not remain hidden forever. While the police pulled back, Marissa Miller refused to accept silence as an answer. Her grief transformed into determination. She wrote hundreds of letters to officials, investigators, and anyone who might listen. her handwriting a testament to the desperation and urgency that filled each day. Each envelope carried more than words. It carried the weight of a mother's love and the unshakable knowledge that her daughters' lives could not be forgotten. Television cameras became her voice when letters were ignored. She appeared on local news programs, speaking with trembling hands and unwavering eyes. Every interview, every plea, reinforced her message. Someone knew what happened to Anna and Lisa, and they had a responsibility to come forward. She spoke not just for herself, but for a community haunted by unanswered questions. Her courage was visible in every frame, a reminder that grief could be a weapon against indifference. Her persistence unsettled those who wished the case forgotten. City officials grew uncomfortable, reluctant to acknowledge the mother whose questions refused to die. Yet Teresa pressed on, refusing to allow bureaucracy, fear, or despair to dictate the narrative. Each confrontation, each public statement, chipped away at the illusion that time could erase wrongdoing. Through it all, the underlying tension remained. The person who had taken her daughters continued to live openly, hidden in plain sight, untouched by the city's sorrow. Teresa's fight became both a beacon of hope and a constant reminder that justice, though delayed, could not be denied forever. Her relentless pursuit kept the case alive in the hearts of Birmingham's residents, and her determination became a symbol. No matter how long the silence, a truth this heavy would eventually demand to be heard. As the investigation slowed and years passed, the city of Birmingham continued to carry the weight of uncertainty. Streets that once felt safe became quiet and cautious. Families adjusted routines, avoiding evening walks, keeping children close, and checking on neighbors more frequently. Fear had seeped into the rhythm of daily life, subtle but unrelenting, shaping decisions and interactions in ways no one could fully escape. The disappearance of Anna and Lisa was no longer just a police case. It had become a community wound, a reminder of how quickly innocence could vanish. Residents whispered about who might be hiding secrets behind closed doors, and every unfamiliar face was met with a heightened awareness that bordered on suspicion. Parents' eyes lingered longer on every stranger, and the city moved under the constant shadow of unspoken dread. Local businesses, too, felt the shift. Store owners closed earlier, wary of the night, and even casual trips to the diner or grocery store carried the silent question, could danger be nearby? Ordinary interactions were infused with tension, as if the air itself carried a warning. The city's collective heartbeat had been altered, each pulse a reminder that the person responsible for the sisters' deaths remained at large, unseen, and untouched by accountability. Yet amid this fear, the Miller family's fight kept the story alive. The unresolved case reminded residents that evil could exist quietly among them, masquerading as ordinary life. The community had adapted, but the underlying truth remained. Someone had taken 2 young lives and had continued to live openly, blending in with the very people who mourned. And still, the unanswered questions hung over every street, every home, and every conversation. The killer remained hidden, leaving the city to live with a quiet, pervasive tension, aware that tragedy could strike again when vigilance faltered, and that justice, for now, was only a possibility, not a guarantee. Even as time pressed forward, one uncomfortable question lingered in Birmingham. Could someone you know be hiding a dark secret? The idea that evil could exist quietly among friends, neighbors, or even family unsettled the city in ways that facts and headlines never could. Every familiar face became a reminder that appearances were fragile, and trust was fragile, often taken for granted until shattered. Discussions at kitchen tables, in carpool lines, and on quiet streets began to turn toward speculation. Who in the community might have observed more than they admitted? Who had seen something, said nothing, and continued to live without suspicion? The city wrestled with a truth no one wanted to fully confront. Evil does not always announce itself. It hides, blends, and waits for the right moment. For the Miller family, the lack of resolution became a constant, heavy presence. Teresa's relentless pursuit of answers, while admirable, highlighted the inadequacies of a system that had failed to uncover the killer's identity. She had forced the question repeatedly, asking it aloud to anyone willing to listen. Yet the silence that met her only strengthened the sense of injustice. The tension in the community was more than fear, it was moral unease, a collective reflection on how well anyone truly knew those around them. Every neighbor, co-worker, or acquaintance became a subject of quiet scrutiny, and the question of trust hung over Birmingham like a shadow no one could shake. Even as the case went cold, the narrative refused to fade. The killer was still free, still hidden, and the city remained aware that someone responsible for unimaginable loss had avoided detection for years. And in that tension, every resident carried the weight of an unspoken challenge. To remain vigilant, to question, and to understand that appearances can be deceiving and that sometimes danger is far closer than anyone realizes. For 20 years, Birmingham learned to live with the silence. The headlines faded, the news anchors moved on, and new families filled the same streets where fear once lived. But while the city buried its worry, one man carried a memory he couldn't escape. His name was Evan Holloway, and he walked through life like a man constantly late for something he refused to attend. On paper, he looked like anyone else: steady job at a hardware store, a quiet apartment, and just enough friendliness to avoid attention. He greeted neighbors when he had to, kept conversations short, and went home to a life that no one ever bothered to question. People liked him because there was nothing to dislike, and that made him comfortably invisible. But routines can hide more than laziness or loneliness. Every morning, Evan woke up with a pounding heart, like he'd been running in his sleep. He often stood in the shower long after the water turned cold, gripping the edge of the tiled wall as if it was the only thing holding him upright. No one ever saw that part of him. They only saw the guy who stocked shelves, fixed squeaky doors, and spent his lunch breaks quietly chewing the same sandwich every day. Coworkers said he was soft-spoken. Some thought he was shy. Others assumed he'd been through something he didn't want to talk about. They were all right, just not in the way they imagined. Evan didn't fear life. He feared memory. He feared the night that wouldn't stay buried, and whether he liked it or not, that night was coming back for him. Because long after the city stopped listening, the truth kept whispering his name. It wasn't done with him, and it demanded to be heard. For 20 years, Miriam Cole's unsolved murder weighed heavily on those who knew her. Families moved away, new houses were built, and fresh residents took up space in the neighborhood, but the story lingered like a curse stitched into the soil. There were no arrests, no confessions, and no conclusive answers. The case sat in a cold file drawer, collecting dust while detectives retired, died, or relocated, leaving behind a haunting legacy of questions that nobody could silence. What made the nightmare so unforgettable wasn't just the brutality of the crime, but the fact that it happened to someone who never sought conflict. Miriam was reserved, soft-spoken, the type of woman who kept her world small. Her closest relatives carried intense guilt, convinced they should have checked on her more often, or made her feel less alone. Her sister, Diane, once confessed to police that she still woke up from dreams of Miriam calling for help she couldn't deliver in time. Every holiday felt incomplete. Every quiet morning brought a sting of regret. Detectives who initially worked the case carried the burden as well. At least 2 of them kept photos of Miriam pinned to their desks long after they were reassigned. One investigator admitted, in a personal memo later found in his retirement box, that Miriam's case felt like being responsible for a ghost who refuses to leave. Even newer officers, who weren't around during the original investigation, described hearing about the case during training as if it was a legend the department couldn't outrun. Over the years, rumors replaced facts, theories replaced evidence, and memory became the sharpest weapon the town wielded. The truth was buried somewhere beneath 20 years of dread, and someone out there lived every day knowing exactly what happened to Miriam Cole. Years went by, and Evan learned to imitate normalcy the way a trained performer memorizes lines. He worked quietly, spoke softly, and moved through each day with the manner of someone who preferred invisible corners. But beneath that calm mask, a mind full of shifting shadows refused to rest. Little things began to chip away at him, questions he couldn't answer, moments he couldn't explain, Memories that returned uninvited like sharp flashes of broken glass cutting through his thoughts. He started freezing up in conversations when someone mentioned missing persons cases. His hands would shake whenever sirens echoed through his street, and he found himself standing by windows at night, scanning the darkness as if expecting someone to step out of it. Soon, coworkers whispered that he seemed distracted, lost somewhere no one could reach. The simple act of hearing a shovel scrape against pavement or seeing a stranger stare too long left him nauseous, drenched in sweat. His silence no longer looked like peace, it looked like fear he couldn't define. Eventually, one question from a family friend pushed him over the edge. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" He laughed it off, but the comment followed him for days. It echoed while he worked, lingered in his sleep, and rattled him until he realized he couldn't silence it anymore. And so, desperate for relief, he walked into a therapist's office and convinced himself he was only there for stress. The therapist, a calm woman with patient eyes, listened as he danced around what truly haunted him. Session after session, Evan spoke about insomnia, guilt, and an unnamed fear that never left his side. He never told the story directly, but every vague detail felt like a confession wearing a mask too thin to last. Something was breaking, and even he could feel the cracks forming, spreading, waiting to split him wide open. Evan's confession didn't arrive all at once. His mind took him back, unwillingly, to a night 20 years earlier. The diner on Green Springs Highway appeared in his memory with vivid clarity, booths glowing under harsh overhead lights. The hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes. Anna and Lisa Miller laughed at a corner table, carefree, their voices light, their smiles unguarded. He remembered the way Lisa tilted her head, hair falling over her eyes, and how Anna reached out to steady her sister when the chair wobbled. It was ordinary, peaceful, until it wasn't. From across the diner, he watched. Every small detail etched itself into his mind. The way the sisters shared a milkshake, the faint scent of vanilla and sugar, the gentle rhythm of their laughter. He remembered thinking that it was the kind of night that should last forever, that no harm could touch them, but he followed anyway. Footsteps silent on the pavement, heart drumming with a tension he didn't fully understand. The warmth of the city evening contrasted sharply with the cold calculation he felt creeping into his mind. Walking behind them, he could see the trust in their steps, the casual ease of sisters who believed the world was safe. The words Anna said to their cousin still rang in his ears. "We'll be fine." She didn't know how close danger truly was. She never knew that someone was observing, learning, waiting for the precise moment to act. This memory, the flashback, broke through Evan's carefully maintained routine. It shattered the illusion of the normal life he'd built over 2 decades. Every sensation returned. The soft night breeze, the distant honk of a car, the shadows that seemed longer than they should be. In reliving it, he finally admitted to himself the weight of what he had carried, the choices he had made, and the consequences that could never be undone. The past and present collided in his mind, a pattern interrupt he could not ignore, forcing him to confront the truth he had buried for 20 years. Evan Holloway walked into the police station that morning like any other citizen might, calm, composed, unremarkable. The officers barely looked up as he approached the front desk, his hands tucked into his pockets, shoulders relaxed. No one suspected that inside him, a storm had been building for 20 years, each day layering guilt upon fear, until it became unbearable. He was seated in an interrogation room, fluorescent lights buzzing quietly above. He stared at the table, the laminated surface reflecting a pale, unsteady image back at him. For years, he had practiced this exact posture, this exact calm, convincing himself that the world would never see through the mask. But as minutes ticked by, the air around him thickened. The weight of memory pressed against his chest. Words he had kept silent for decades began to push forward, demanding release. Detectives tried small talk at first. Questions about routine, work, nothing threatening. Evan answered in clipped sentences, polite but distant. Then, the first slip came: a pause, a shiver, a breath that seemed too loud for the room. He glanced at the photograph lying on the table. 2 young women, smiling, unaware of the horrors waiting outside that summer night. His eyes flickered over Anna first, then Lisa, and something inside him cracked. He began to speak, haltingly at first, fragments of memories spilling like water through a narrow crack. Every detail he avoided for decades was now clawing its way out. The night, the woods, the sound of leaves crunching beneath hurried footsteps, the panic he had felt as events spiraled uncontrollably. This was the first moment of real confession, the first time his carefully constructed mask faltered, and as he leaned forward, voice low and trembling, it became clear that the truth long buried was about to resurface in a way no one in Birmingham could have anticipated. Before we move on, take a moment to let this sink in. Subscribe now if you don't. You may never know the warning signs of danger lurking close to home. Are you willing to risk ignorance? Evan's voice shook as he began to recount the night of August 2002, each word dragging him deeper into the memory he had carried for 2 decades. He described the diner again, the laughter of Anna and Lisa, the clink of dishes, the ordinary joy that made the evening so ordinary, so unsuspecting. He remembered walking behind them, each step measured, heart racing with a tension he could not name at the time. He told how the ordinary night twisted into panic, the moment confrontation replaced hesitation. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and terror surged. Evan's calm facade dissolved as he described trying to control a situation that had already slipped beyond his grasp. Every plan he had imagined in silence failed, as fear overwhelmed him. He admitted to freezing, to grasping at decisions that offered no escape from what was happening. The fear escalated, building into a crescendo that became physical. He remembered the sounds, the struggle, the voices, the desperate pleas that he could not stop. He remembered thinking that if he could only make it end, the world would forget him, would pretend this night never existed. But it wasn't that simple. Panic transformed into action he could not undo. He recounted the flight from the diner, the shadows stretching across streets, the quick steps through empty blocks. Every moment seemed ordinary from the outside, but inside, Evan was trapped in an unbearable storm of guilt and terror. As he spoke, the detectives listened in stunned silence. This was not a rehearsed story, not a constructed lie. It was raw, trembling truth. And with every sentence, the weight of 20 years of secrecy pressed down, a confession both horrifying and unrelenting. Even now, the city's quiet streets were haunted by memories that would never fade, and Evan's admission opened the first door to truths long concealed. Evan's next words hit the room with a force that made every officer lean forward. He paused, staring at the table, voice low and deliberate. "I wasn't alone that night," he said, and for the first time in 20 years, he spoke the truth that had been buried with the sisters. The admission hung in the air like a weight too heavy to lift. He described the presence of another person, someone whose involvement he had feared and protected for decades. Every movement, every decision that night had been shared, every panic-stricken choice compounded by the silent, unspoken cooperation of another. It wasn't just fear or instinct that guided him, it was a partnership in tragedy, a dark alignment that had made the crime possible and the concealment so complete. The detectives exchanged glances, absorbing the shock. This revelation reframed everything, turning a case they had assumed was singular into a complex web of guilt and hidden knowledge. Evans spoke of moments when his accomplice took control, moments when his own panic was mirrored, amplified, and directed. The two had moved in eerie synchrony, an unspoken understanding of how far they could go before the night itself became unmanageable. As he recounted the details, Evans' hands shook. He described the dread of knowing he would carry the consequences alone for years, while the other continued life unchallenged, free to blend into the community, to smile, to be trusted. His confession was more than a recounting of events. It was a release of decades of fear, of carrying a secret that could have destroyed him at any moment. And then he looked up, eyes locking with the detectives. "He's out there," Evan whispered. "The other person. He knows things I can never take back." The room went silent. Shock had replaced disbelief, and in that stillness, A question lingered for every viewer listening. He admitted the truth, but someone else was involved. Evan's voice grew steadier as he began the full confession, recounting each step he had taken that night, the choices, the panic, the irreversible acts that led to tragedy. He described the confrontation with Anna and Lisa, how fear and anger collided, and how the situation escalated beyond anything he could control. Each action replayed in his mind as if the night were unfolding all over again. Every sound, every hurried movement, every desperate decision burned into his memory. He told of the frantic moments that followed, the hurried attempts to hide the evidence, and the eerie quiet of the woods where the sisters were buried. There were no fingerprints, no signs, no traceable markers. Everything had been done quickly, silently, as if the night itself conspired to shield them from discovery. But for Evan, the weight of each choice was unshakable. He carried it like a shadow that never left. The detectives listened intently, taking in the details of how the crime had been concealed, how the two graves had remained untouched for decades. Evan spoke of fear, not just for himself, but for what the other person might do if secrets were revealed. He admitted to covering tracks, erasing moments that could lead back to them, hoping against hope that no one would ever uncover the truth. Even as he confessed, he emphasized the psychological toll, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the constant replaying of the night in his mind. He had lived with the terror of discovery for 20 years, and now, finally, he was releasing the burden. And in this moment, the magnitude of what he had done became undeniable. The full story emerged, raw, unfiltered, and haunting. Every detail painted a picture of terror and panic turned fatal, a confession that carried the weight of lost lives and shattered innocence. As Evan's confession reached its peak, the room seemed to hold its breath. Every word, every pause, amplified the reality that two lives had been stolen. And for 20 years, the truth had been locked inside a man who lived among the unsuspecting. The weight of his admission pressed not only on the officers but on anyone imagining the horror, how ordinary life could hide such darkness, how fear and guilt could fester silently for decades. The tension in the room was palpable, even without dramatic gestures. Evan described the meticulous steps taken to cover the crime, the careful timing, and the split-second decisions that turned panic into irreversible acts. Each sentence reinforced the chilling truth. Danger could be closer than anyone ever suspected, lurking behind familiar faces, ordinary routines, and seemingly safe streets. And then came the realization no one could escape. This was not a distant story. The details Evan revealed were a warning, a lesson in vigilance, a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. Listeners could feel the fear seep in, the creeping awareness that what happened to Anna and Lisa could happen anywhere, if unnoticed, if unchecked. It was here, in the wake of Evan's confession, that the first guilt-tripping message for viewers became urgent. If you don't subscribe right now, you could miss warnings like this that might one day save you or someone you love. Are you willing to take that risk? The words were not merely a plea, they were a call to act, to stay informed, to recognize danger before it strikes. This section concluded the confession, but its impact lingered, resonating with the truth that silence, secrecy, and inaction can be deadly. The story demanded attention, and the viewer could not simply turn away. Every moment of hesitation carried a weight that would only grow if ignored. Years had passed since the Miller sisters were laid to rest for the first time, yet the case that haunted Birmingham was far from over. Detective Marissa Doyle, known for her relentless pursuit of truth, inherited the cold file that had frustrated generations of officers. Every page, every note, every fading photograph reminded her that justice had been postponed, not denied. When Evan Holloway confessed, the world that had seemed settled erupted into motion. Marissa pored over the evidence with fresh eyes, analyzing timelines, scrutinizing past statements, and examining records that had long been considered inconclusive. The focus quickly shifted to Caleb Mercer, a name that had once been questioned, dismissed, and walked free. Now, in the light of Evan's confession, every detail demanded a second look. Alibis that had been considered airtight were revisited. Caleb's statements, his whereabouts, the claims of witnesses, they were re-examined, cross-referenced, and measured against new evidence. The tiniest discrepancies, once overlooked, became glaring signs of deception. Cell phone pings, previously dismissed as inconclusive, now painted a pattern too suspicious to ignore. For Marissa, the tension was not just procedural, it was deeply personal. Years of lies had distorted the truth, and uncovering it would bring a reckoning long delayed. The emotional weight of reopening the case was immense. Families waited. Memories demanded answers. And somewhere, Caleb Mercer, living a life of respectability and trust, faced the unraveling of the world he had carefully built around a lie. As the investigation gained momentum, Marissa posed a question for anyone listening. Have you ever known someone was lying, and it shocked you? That disbelief, that gut-level shock, mirrored the unfolding tension in Birmingham. For 2 decades, deception had ruled. Now, the city was on the brink of confronting it. Caleb Mercer had spent 20 years crafting an image of normalcy. He was the reliable neighbor, the friendly coach, the man who never raised suspicion. But under Marissa Doyle's scrutiny, the facade began to crack. Every statement, every claimed alibi, every detail of his seemingly ordinary life was now examined for inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Detectives reviewed cell phone records with painstaking attention. Pings that once seemed insignificant suddenly aligned with key moments on the night the sisters vanished. Witness statements from 2002 were re-interviewed, and contradictions emerged, small at first, then unmistakable. Caleb's story, carefully constructed over decades, could no longer shield him from the truth that was closing in. Marissa noticed the subtle signs of anxiety in Caleb's responses. The slight pause before answering, the fleeting eye contact, the tension in his hands, all were markers that truth was slipping through the cracks. The careful routine that had kept suspicion at bay could no longer contain the pressure of a confession from someone who had been there with him that night. As the investigation deepened, Marissa felt the emotional gravity of years of deception. The sisters' lives had been stolen, and the man responsible had been living freely while their family suffered. The lie that Caleb had depended on was unraveling, piece by piece, and the weight of it pressed on every interaction, every phone call, every observation made by the team. For viewers, the tension posed a chilling thought. Could someone you trust be hiding a secret so dark that it changes everything you thought you knew? The question lingered, drawing a connection between the story and anyone who had ever felt the shock of betrayal from someone close. As the investigation intensified, Detective Doyle and her team began piecing together the fractures in Caleb Mercer's alibi. Statements from 2 decades ago, once accepted without question, now clashed with fresh evidence. A neighbor's recollection of seeing him drive near the service road, once dismissed as mistaken memory, now gained weight. Cell phone pings, meticulously analyzed, revealed Caleb's presence near key locations at crucial times. Each contradiction tightened the noose. Caleb had relied on a life built from lies, confident that 20 years would obscure his involvement. But as the patterns emerged, the truth refused to stay buried. The detectives discovered moments where his own recollections faltered, where timelines didn't align, and where claims once considered credible were now impossible to defend. The emotional intensity of the investigation grew with every discovery. For Marissa, the work was not just about evidence, it was about justice, about restoring the lives of 2 sisters taken too soon. Every detail revealed a man who had manipulated trust and evaded accountability, leaving a family in relentless pain while he prospered without consequence. The breakthrough came when old witness statements were cross-referenced with modern data. The inconsistencies were undeniable, forming a chain of evidence that led directly to Caleb. The detective team felt the gravity of the moment. After 20 years, the walls of deception were finally crumbling. For viewers, the tension mirrored a universal fear. Have you ever known someone was lying, and it shocked you? The question pierced beyond the story, forcing reflection on the trust we place in others and the hidden truths that sometimes lie just beneath ordinary appearances. With the contradictions and breakthroughs exposing Caleb Mercer's deception, Detective Marissa Doyle and her team prepared to act. Every move was calculated, every step designed to prevent him from fleeing or destroying evidence. The tension in the precinct was electric. Decades of frustration, unanswered questions, and grief now converged on a single moment. Caleb remained unaware that the walls were closing in. His routine life coaching, youth baseball, attending neighborhood events, and maintaining his reputation continued as if nothing had changed. Yet, the scrutiny from Marissa's team made the night of reckoning inevitable. They had gathered undeniable evidence, corroborated by cell records, witness statements, and Evan Holloway's confession. The case had transformed from a cold file into a live pursuit of justice. Inside the team's strategy meeting, every detail of Caleb's movements was dissected. They reviewed his likely reactions, escape routes, and potential allies who might intervene. The detective team moved like a precise machine, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no surprises, no room for error. The emotional weight of the impending arrest pressed heavily. For 20 years, the Miller family had waited, their grief compounded by uncertainty. Now, the possibility of closure felt within reach, though tempered by the knowledge of the horrors revealed by Evan's testimony. For viewers, the tension was almost unbearable. The story posed a chilling question. What if someone in your own community, someone trusted and familiar, was hiding a secret capable of destroying lives? The stakes were universal, a reminder that evil can sometimes wear a friendly face. Before taking the final step, Marissa and her team ensured every precaution was in place. The city held its breath, ready for the moment when truth would finally confront deceit. The morning air was unusually still as officers quietly approached Caleb Mercer's home. Neighbors, going about their routines, sensed something shifting, an undercurrent of tension that set their hearts racing. Within moments, the presence of law enforcement became impossible to ignore. Children paused mid-step on the way to school. Adults stepped onto porches, watching silently as a familiar figure was confronted by the weight of decades-old truth. Caleb, who had spent 20 years projecting calm and reliability, was taken by surprise. Handcuffs clicked into place, marking the first time the community saw the friendly neighbor as something else entirely. Whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs into wide-eyed conversations. The shock was everywhere. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the crimes now brought to light. As Caleb was led from his home, the reality hit like a physical blow. A life meticulously constructed on trust and smiles crumbled in front of everyone. The street, usually filled with the hum of normalcy, seemed to freeze, each observer acutely aware that a monster had lived among them, undetected for decades. Inside the police vehicles, officers reviewed every detail, ready for the next stage, the interrogation and Evan Holloway's forthcoming testimony. The stakes were monumental. Years of pain, grief, and unanswered questions now demanded confrontation, and the city waited with bated breath. Comment if you think justice was finally served. It was a moment to reflect on the fragile nature of trust and the long shadows cast by deception. Caleb Mercer's arrest was not just an end to freedom, it was the beginning of truth, finally facing accountability. A lesson Birmingham and its people would never forget. The courtroom was silent, a tension so thick it seemed to press against every wall. All eyes were on Evan Holloway as he took the stand. For 2 decades, he had carried the secret alone, a burden that now found its voice in a room full of witnesses, jurors, and detectives. Each word he spoke pulled back the curtain on the events of that night, exposing the truth in painstaking detail. Evan recounted the moments leading up to the confrontation with the Miller sisters, the panic that escalated beyond control, and the involvement of Caleb Mercer. His voice trembled at times, but the clarity of his testimony left no room for doubt. Every description, every revelation, cut through the facade Caleb had maintained for 20 years. The courtroom felt the weight of decades of lies collapsing. Caleb sat motionless, the mask of composure faltering with each new fact Evan revealed. The betrayal of trust, the deception woven into years of normalcy, became painfully clear to everyone present. Friends and neighbors in the audience struggled with disbelief, grappling with the stark contrast between the man they had trusted and the one now exposed as a participant in a horrific crime. The emotional intensity reached its peak when Evan described the burial site with precision only someone present could know. Details that had been hidden in the shadows for 20 years emerged, vivid and undeniable, leaving no escape for Caleb. He admitted the truth, but someone else was involved. The revelation served as both shock and warning, a reminder that even familiar faces can harbor unimaginable secrets. Subscribe now if you don't. You may never know the warning signs of danger lurking close to home. Are you willing to risk ignorance? News of Caleb Mercer's arrest spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Porches filled with onlookers, whispers carried down streets, and phone calls delivered the shocking news to every corner of Birmingham. The man who had smiled at barbecues, coached children, and seemed a pillar of the community, was now exposed as someone who had shared in an unspeakable crime. Shock turned quickly into anger. Friends who had once trusted him struggled to reconcile the familiar face with the horrors revealed in court. Parents hugged their children tighter, recalling the stories of Anna and Lisa, and realizing that the threat had walked among them for decades, hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Conversations in shops, cars, and homes were punctuated by disbelief. How could someone so seemingly ordinary commit such acts? For the Miller family, the arrest was a mix of relief and pain. Memories long buried resurfaced, along with the gnawing knowledge that justice had been delayed but not denied. Teresa Miller clutched the photographs of her daughters, tears streaming, as a wave of emotions, grief, anger, and finally a fragile hope passed through her. In the courtroom, the weight of years of secrecy, lies, and fear pressed down on everyone present. The city, too, seemed to hold its breath, suspended between the terror of the past and the possibility of accountability at last. The courtroom atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation as Caleb Mercer took his seat. Every eye in the room followed him, searching for cracks in the composure he had maintained for 20 years. Across the room, Evan Holloway prepared to recount the night that had haunted both men in very different ways. The tension was unbearable, each heartbeat echoing the long wait for truth and justice. As the proceedings began, Evan's testimony pierced the silence. He described every moment with unwavering precision, exposing the horrifying decisions that had led to the deaths of Anna and Lisa Miller. Each revelation chipped away at Caleb's carefully constructed facade, leaving him visibly unsettled. The courtroom could feel the weight of betrayal. The man everyone had trusted for decades was now confronted with irrefutable proof of his actions. The narrative unfolded like a tense drama. Witnesses corroborated key details, cell phone records aligned with Evan's account, and the jury absorbed every fact, every lie exposed. Caleb's past alibi, once considered airtight, collapsed under scrutiny. The audience could almost feel the collective gasp of a community finally facing a truth they had long avoided. The familiar, friendly neighbor revealed as a participant in unimaginable crimes. It was a lesson in vigilance, trust, and the hidden darkness that can exist behind everyday faces. The courtroom was a stage where truth demanded acknowledgement. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, built toward an unavoidable climax. The betrayal, the revelation, and the decades of pain converged in a single, unforgettable confrontation. The final hours of the trial were a storm of emotion. Prosecutors summarized decades of suffering, weaving together the meticulous details of the night the Miller sisters were taken, the long years of secrecy, and the undeniable evidence against both Evan Holloway and Caleb Mercer. Their words carried the weight of every parent's fear, every community's anxiety, and every unanswered question that had haunted Birmingham for 20 years. The defense attempted to sow doubt, emphasizing gaps and uncertainties. But the courtroom had already absorbed the relentless truth. The faces of Anna and Lisa, preserved in photographs, reminded everyone of the lives stolen, the innocence lost, and the years of pain that no argument could erase. Each juror was acutely aware that their decision would finally bring either closure or prolong the torment for those left behind. As the jury retired to deliberate, silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Every observer, from family members to the public, understood the magnitude of what was at stake. The city itself seemed to pause, waiting for justice to emerge from the shadows. Whispers filled corners, hearts raced, and the tension in the air was nearly unbearable. Could someone you know harbor secrets that could devastate lives? The courtroom, the city, and the families waited collectively, each heartbeat echoing the anticipation and dread of the unknown verdict. Hours later, the jury returned. Their faces were solemn but resolute, and the courtroom braced for the words that would finally give shape to 2 decades of suffering. The story of Anna and Lisa Miller was nearing its long-awaited resolution, and the city of Birmingham prepared to exhale, but not without carrying the lessons this case would leave behind for generations. The courtroom buzzed with a tense energy as the trial of Evan Holloway and Caleb Mercer commenced. Families, journalists, and curious onlookers filled every available seat, all drawn by the weight of a case that had haunted Birmingham for 2 decades. The Miller family sat in the front row, their hands tightly clasped, the photos of Anna and Lisa resting on Teresa Miller's lap, as if to remind everyone of the stakes. From the first moment, the proceedings were electric with tension. The prosecution laid out a timeline, reconstructing that fateful night with painstaking clarity. Each witness, each record, and each corroborated detail tightened the narrative around the men accused, leaving no room for ambiguity. The city had waited 20 years for justice, and now it demanded it with relentless intensity. The defense attempted to counter with alternate narratives, pointing to minor inconsistencies and emphasizing the passage of time. But in the faces of the jurors, the community, and especially the Miller family, it was clear. The truth had already spoken. Each testimony, each revelation, brought the audience closer to a realization that the nightmare Birmingham had endured was about to reach a long-awaited reckoning. Throughout the day, emotions ran high. Whispers of disbelief swept through the courtroom as details long hidden resurfaced. The lingering fear, the anger, and the grief intertwined, gripping everyone present. For viewers at home, it was a reminder of the human cost behind every headline, the lives forever changed by one night's tragic events. The tension built toward the inevitable question: could decades of hidden guilt withstand the relentless exposure of truth? The answer would soon come, carrying with it the weight of justice, sorrow, and an emotional release that the city had waited years to experience. The courtroom fell into an unbearable silence as the jury filed back in, the tension thick enough to feel in every breath. The 4 persons stood, eyes fixed on the defendants, and began to read the verdict. One word at a time, the weight of 2 decades of fear, uncertainty, and sorrow pressed down on everyone present. Guilty. The word struck like a hammer, reverberating through the room. Evan Holloway, who had carried the burden of his actions for 20 years, remained still, his expression betraying a mix of resignation and despair. Caleb Mercer's mask cracked in that instant, the calm facade he had maintained for 2 decades, finally giving way to the inevitable truth. Tears streamed down Teresa Miller's face as the realization sank in. Relief, grief, and a long-suppressed anger collided, leaving her shaken but resolute. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the community finally confronting the reality that the men responsible for the deaths of Anna and Lisa Miller would face accountability. Families who had watched from the gallery felt the tension of years lift slightly, though the scars of the past would linger forever. For the city of Birmingham, the verdict marked a turning point. Conversations on streets, in homes, and at workplaces revolved around the case, the decades of unanswered questions, and the closure now offered by the court's decision. Even so, the community understood that justice, while necessary, could not erase the pain of what had been lost. Don't risk staying uninformed. Subscribe now, or comment why you're letting the truth slip by unnoticed. Your choice may haunt you later. The verdict was more than legal resolution. It was a message that truth, though delayed, can never be fully silenced, and vigilance remains essential in every community. The judge's gavel fell with deliberate force, punctuating a sentence that had been 2 decades in the making. Evan Holloway and Caleb Mercer, were both handed life, without the possibility of parole. The words echoed through the courtroom, carrying the weight of years of pain, fear, and unrelenting grief. For the families, it was a bitter but necessary acknowledgement of the wrongs inflicted. A formal declaration that justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. Teresa Miller clutched the photographs of Anna and Lisa, her hands trembling but her gaze unwavering. Each tear was a mixture of sorrow and relief, a release of the tension that had haunted her for 20 years. The courtroom, once filled with fear and anticipation, shifted into a collective exhale. Strangers and community members alike felt the emotional weight lift, if only slightly, as the men responsible were removed from the society that had unknowingly shielded them. Outside the courthouse, the city seemed to breathe differently. Conversations on sidewalks and in cafes carried a new tone, acknowledgement of pain, yes, but also recognition of the resilience shown by the Miller family and those who had refused to let the case fade into oblivion. The closure was imperfect, the grief eternal, but justice had etched its mark, undeniable and final. For viewers, the trial and sentencing delivered a visceral lesson. Consequences may be delayed, but accountability cannot be avoided forever. The emotional payoff was not only for the families but for every community member who had lived under the shadow of uncertainty for years. The story reinforced a chilling truth. Some dangers remain hidden, and the cost of ignorance can be catastrophic. Don't risk staying uninformed. Subscribe now, or comment why you're letting the truth slip by unnoticed. Your choice may haunt you later. The sentence was final, but the warning lingered. A reminder that vigilance and awareness are essential to protect the innocent. The courtroom's echoes had faded, but for Teresa Miller, the weight of 20 years pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had spent 2 decades chasing shadows, writing letters, making phone calls, and staring at empty rooms where her daughters once laughed. Now, standing before the gravesites of Anna and Lisa, she felt a tremor of relief, interlaced with sorrow so deep it threatened to break her. This was closure, fragile and imperfect, but it was real. Her hands, worn from years of worry and persistence, clutched the photographs of her daughters. The images captured moments long past. Anna's protective smile, Lisa's unguarded laughter. Tears streamed freely. But they were no longer just tears of despair. They were an acknowledgement of survival, of persistence, of finally being heard. Family members who had once lived in constant dread now shared quiet moments of reflection. They spoke softly, exchanged glances heavy with grief, yet brightened by relief. For the first time in decades, they could imagine a life not dominated by fear and unanswered questions. The neighborhood, once cloaked in suspicion and anxiety, began to breathe in rhythm with the family. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers had followed the case, each heart carrying a piece of the Millers' pain. The community's acknowledgement, though unable to undo the past, provided an unspoken affirmation. The family had endured, and their persistence had illuminated the truth. For the Miller family, closure was not a single moment. It was a process of feeling, remembering, and slowly letting go of the endless questions. Yet even in relief, the memories remained vivid, a reminder that loss could not be erased, only carried differently. Before we move on, consider your own community. The weight of vigilance, compassion, and attention to what might be hidden can change lives. Birmingham itself seemed to exhale after decades of tension. Streets that had been silent in fear now echoed with cautious normalcy. Parents no longer kept children indoors after sunset, and store owners unlocked doors without glancing over their shoulders. Yet beneath the everyday rhythms, the city carried the memory of what had happened, the unease that had lingered for years like a shadow that refused to dissipate entirely. Neighbors spoke quietly in clusters, remembering the days when rumors and fear had dictated their lives. Conversations often returned to the Miller sisters, their laughter, their smiles, and the cruel absence that had darkened the community for so long. In coffee shops, on front porches, and in church halls, people reflected not only on the horror, but also on the resilience of those who refused to give up. Local authorities and law enforcement officers revisited the lessons the case had imparted. Awareness, meticulous record-keeping, and the courage to pursue leads, even decades later, became examples for future investigations. The city recognized that vigilance and persistence could overcome time, deception, and fear, reinforcing the idea that truth, though delayed, could still prevail. The community, scarred yet united, began to rebuild its sense of safety and trust. People learned to watch, to question, and to support one another. The story of Anna and Lisa Miller became a symbol not just of tragedy, but of the power of collective memory and action. Through this reflection, Birmingham understood that the cost of indifference could be devastating. The city's trauma remained, but it now carried a deeper understanding. The pursuit of justice and awareness must never stop, even when the past seems unchangeable. If this happened in your neighborhood, wouldn't you want to know what to look for? Subscribe to stay aware and protect those around you. The Miller case became more than a story of tragedy. It was a lesson written in real pain and hard-earned truth. Cold cases are not always forgotten. They wait for patience, persistence, and courage to bring them into the light. The story of Anna and Lisa Miller reminded the community that time does not erase guilt, and silence cannot shield wrongdoing forever. For families like the Millers, the lesson was painfully clear. Never stop asking questions. Never accept uncertainty. And never let hope fade. Teresa's relentless pursuit had proven that a single voice, raised consistently and without surrender, could eventually tip the scales toward justice. Her perseverance became a blueprint for those facing the anguish of unresolved loss, demonstrating that the human spirit can endure even when hope feels buried. For the wider community, the narrative highlighted the danger of complacency. Awareness of one's surroundings, attention to inconsistencies, and courage to speak up can save lives. The fear that had haunted Birmingham for 20 years underscored a universal truth. Dangers are often closer than we think, and vigilance is the responsibility of everyone. This was also a warning to viewers. Ignoring the warning signs, dismissing small details, or relying solely on appearances can carry consequences. True safety comes from awareness, from taking action, and from refusing to let uncertainty go unchallenged. The Miller sisters' story served as a stark reminder. Justice may be delayed, but truth has a way of surfacing, and those who persist are never ignored. Before moving on, ask yourself, in your community, would you recognize danger if it lurked quietly nearby? Share your thoughts in the comments, and reflect on what lessons you can carry forward. Even after justice was served, the story of the Miller sisters lingered like a quiet echo, reminding everyone that some truths take time to reveal themselves. Cold cases are not always unsolved. They are waiting for the right moment, the right witness, or the right conscience to bring them into the open. In Birmingham, the names Anna and Lisa Miller became more than memories. They became a symbol of patience, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The community reflected on what had been lost and what had been learned. Neighbors shared stories, offered support to families still searching, and committed to paying attention when something seemed off. Trust, once shaken, began to rebuild slowly, carried by conversations, vigilance, and shared responsibility. People understood that justice is not only delivered in courtrooms, it is also nurtured in everyday awareness, in noticing details, and in acting when suspicions arise. Viewers, take this to heart. We've all witnessed injustice in some form, whether personal, local, or distant. Ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in the Miller's shoes? How would you act if someone you trusted concealed a devastating secret? These are not easy questions, but they are the questions that keep communities safe. Some cold cases may appear dormant, but the truth waits patiently for those willing to seek it. Awareness, courage, and action are the tools to ensure that the innocent are protected, and that silence does not empower wrongdoing. For all of you watching, the final thought is this: stay alert, stay informed, and never underestimate the power of persistence. Some stories don't end when the verdict is read. They end when communities choose to remember, reflect, and learn.